The first time I realized my family was planning to erase me, I was standing in my mother's kitchen, holding a mug of coffee that had already gone cold, while they discussed my future as if I weren't in the room. "I think it's best if Claire signs the papers quietly," my older brother said, tapping his finger against the granite counter. "No drama. We don't want this to turn into a whole thing." I was 32 years old. I owned my own condo. I had a steady career. And yet, in that moment, I felt like a child being talked over at a parent-teacher meeting. My name is Claire Whitman, and I grew up believing that if I stayed reasonable, patient, and useful, I would always have a place in my family. I was wrong. Let me rewind a little, because none of this started with legal papers or whispered conversations. It started with something much smaller, something that felt insignificant at the time. It started with a Christmas dinner. Every December, my parents hosted Christmas Eve at their house in Westfield, New Jersey. Same routine every year. Prime rib, my mother's overcooked green beans, and my father pouring wine like he was running a country club. My brother Daniel always arrived late, usually with some story about traffic or an important call he had to take. My younger sister Megan showed up with whatever boyfriend she had that year, and I showed up early, like always, to help my mother set the table. That year, I noticed something different. My name wasn't on any of the place cards. At first, I thought it was a mistake. My mother was meticulous, but overwhelmed, and she had been forgetting small things lately. I didn't say anything. I just picked up a blank card from the drawer and wrote my name myself. When Daniel arrived, my father stood up to greet him, clapped him on the shoulder, and said loudly, "There he is, the future of the Whitman Group." The Whitman Group was our family business. A mid-sized commercial property management company my grandfather started in the 1970s. It wasn't glamorous, but it was stable. Office parks, strip malls, medical buildings. My father took it over. Then Daniel joined after college. I joined too. Not officially, not on paper. But I've been doing the books since I was 25. I had a degree in accounting. I worked for a regional firm during the day, and at night I helped my father temporarily with payroll issues, lease reconciliations, tax prep. Temporary turned into years. I never complained. I told myself it was family. That Christmas, after dinner, my father made a toast. "To legacy," he said, lifting his glass. "To continuity. And to Daniel, who will be taking on a bigger role in the company next year." Everyone clapped. Megan smiled. My mother dabbed her eyes. Daniel nodded modestly, like he hadn't been expecting it. No one looked at me. I smiled anyway. That was my role. Smile. Don't make it awkward. Later that night, as I was helping my mother load the dishwasher, she said casually, "Daniel mentioned you've been very helpful with the books. We appreciate that." Helpful. I nodded. Of course. That was the word they always used for me. Helpful. Not essential. Not valuable. Helpful. Like an extra chair you pull out when guests come over. I didn't know then that they were already planning to cut me out. The real shift happened 6 months later, on a Tuesday afternoon in May, when my father asked me to stop by the office. "Just want your opinion on something," he said on the phone. I remember noticing how clean his desk was when I walked in. Too clean. The family photos had been moved. The old leather blotter was gone. There was a thin folder placed neatly in the center. Daniel was there too, leaning against the window, arms crossed. "Sit," my father said. I sat. He slid the folder toward me. "We're restructuring." I opened it. Legal documents, LLC amendments, ownership percentages. My name wasn't anywhere. "I don't understand," I said slowly. Daniel spoke before my father could. "We're simplifying things. Cleaner structure. Better for investors." Investors? That was new. My father cleared his throat. "You've done good work, Claire. But this business needs a clear line of succession." "And that doesn't include me?" I asked. My mother, who had been silent until then, said gently, "You have your own career, sweetheart. Daniel's devoted his life to the company." That wasn't true. Daniel had joined 3 years after I started doing the books. He took long lunches. He delegated. He complained constantly about stress. I looked back down at the papers. "So what happens to the work I've been doing?" Daniel smiled. "We'll outsource accounting. Cleaner that way. No family complications." There it was. Family complications. I was the complication. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't beg. I closed the folder and slid it back across the desk. "Okay," I said. My father looked relieved. My mother smiled like she'd been bracing for something worse. Daniel relaxed, like a problem had solved itself. What none of them realized was that something else had just happened. I had stopped trying to belong. Over the next few weeks, I quietly stepped back. I stopped answering late-night calls. I stopped fixing errors I noticed in their spreadsheets. I stopped reminding them about deadlines. No one thanked me for the years of unpaid labor. No one asked why I'd gone quiet. Then, one Friday evening, I got an email from Daniel. Subject line: quick favor. He needed me to review some financials before meeting with a potential buyer. Just a quick look. Just to be safe. I stared at the screen for a long time. That was the moment I understood something with absolute clarity. They didn't want me in the family business. They just wanted access to my competence. I didn't reply. 3 days later, my mother called me, her voice tight. "Daniel says you're being difficult." I looked out the window of my condo, at the street below, at people living lives that didn't revolve around family hierarchies and unspoken rules. "I'm not being difficult," I said. "I'm just not helping anymore." There was a pause. Then she said the sentence that changed everything. "Well, if you're not contributing, Claire, I don't see why you should expect to benefit from things down the line." Down the line. Inheritance. The house. The business. The things I'd assumed foolishly would be shared because I was a daughter, because I was family. That night, I opened a file on my laptop and started documenting everything. Every email, every request, every financial irregularity I'd quietly corrected over the years. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do yet, but for the first time in my life, I understood. This wasn't about love. It was about control. And I had just been pushed far enough to stop playing along. The first thing I did after that phone call wasn't emotional. It was practical. I opened a new folder on my laptop and labeled it Personal. Inside it, I created subfolders by year: emails, financial statements, draft contracts, text message screenshots. Things I'd never thought to save before because I never imagined I'd need to protect myself from my own family. For years, I'd operated on trust, on assumption, on the unspoken belief that blood created obligation. What I was learning, slowly and painfully, was that blood only mattered when it flowed in the right direction. 2 weeks after I stopped helping, Daniel called again. This time, he didn't pretend it was casual. "You're really going to do this?" he asked. "Do what?" "Cut us off. Over nothing." I leaned back in my chair. It was late. I'd just gotten home from work, kicked off my shoes, and reheated leftovers. My life, without realizing it, had already gotten quieter. "It's not nothing," I said. "You restructured the company without me. That was Dad's decision. And you benefited." Silence on the line. Then a sigh, like I was exhausting him. "You always take things personally, Claire." There it was, the family diagnosis. Sensitive, emotional, difficult. "I didn't argue," I said. "I didn't fight you. I accepted it. By walking away. By respecting the structure you chose." He laughed, short and sharp. "You know Mom's upset, right?" "I'm sure she is. She thinks you're punishing her." I didn't respond. Daniel lowered his voice. "Look, let's not make this bigger than it needs to be. Just help with the financials for now. We'll revisit things later." Later. That word again. Always later. Later never came. "No," I said. This time, I heard it. The shift. The moment his patience turned into something colder. "Fine," he said. "Just don't expect to be included when things move forward." The line went dead. A week later, I was uninvited from Sunday dinner. My mother texted me that they were keeping it small. Megan posted photos on Instagram that night. Prime rib, wine glasses, the familiar dining room table. I stared at the images longer than I should have. Not because I missed the food or the routine, but because I was seeing the pattern clearly for the first time. Inclusion had always been conditional. As long as I was useful. As long as I didn't challenge the hierarchy. Once I stepped out of line, I became optional. The next escalation came quietly, wrapped in concern. My father asked to meet me for coffee. Neutral ground. A cafe near my condo. He arrived early, already seated, hands folded around his mug. He looked older than I remembered. Or maybe I was just seeing him without the filter of obligation. "Your mother's worried," he said after we sat down. No greeting. "I'm fine," I said. He nodded, like he hadn't expected any other answer. "Daniel's under a lot of pressure," he continued. "This potential sale could change everything." I waited. "You know the company better than anyone," he said. "It would mean a lot if you helped smooth things over." "There's nothing to smooth," I said. "I'm not part of the company." He frowned. "That doesn't mean you stop being family." I looked at him. Really looked at him. "Then why does it feel like I already have?" I asked. He didn't answer that. Instead, he reached into his jacket and pulled out another folder. My stomach tightened. "This is just a formality," he said, sliding it across the table. "We're updating our estate planning. Standard stuff." I opened it. A revised will. Daniel named as primary beneficiary of the business assets. Megan listed next. Charitable donations. Then, near the bottom, my name. A fixed sum, significantly less than the others. "What is this?" I asked. "It's fair," he said quickly. "You're independent. You've always been independent." Independent. Another word that sounded like praise, but functioned like a dismissal. "So this is because I stopped helping," I said. His jaw tightened. "This isn't a punishment. It feels like one." He leaned forward. "Claire, families don't keep score." I almost laughed. Almost. "You want me to keep contributing," I said slowly. "But you don't want me to have standing. Is that right?" "That's not. You want my labor without my voice." His eyes flicked around the cafe, uncomfortable. "Lower your voice." I realized then that he wasn't angry. He was embarrassed, afraid someone might hear. "I'm not signing anything today," I said. His expression hardened. "You don't need to." "I think I do," I replied. "If this is the direction you're going, I need time." Time. The thing they never wanted to give me unless it benefited them. We parted stiffly. No hug, no reassurance. That night, I called a lawyer. Her name was Elaine Porter. A colleague had recommended her years ago, back when I'd joked about someday needing legal advice for family drama. She listened without interrupting as I explained everything. The unpaid work, the restructuring, the will. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. "Claire," she said carefully, "do you have records of your involvement with the business?" "Yes." "How far back?" 7 years. She exhaled softly. "That's substantial." "What does that mean?" "It means," she said, "that you may have more leverage than you realize." That word again. Leverage. Power. Things I'd never allowed myself to consider in the context of my family. Over the next month, things deteriorated quickly. Daniel stopped speaking to me entirely. Megan sent passive-aggressive texts about choosing sides. My mother left voicemails that sounded loving on the surface, but carried an undercurrent of accusation. "We just don't understand why you're doing this to us," as if my silence were an attack. Then came the email that pushed everything over the edge. A formal notice from the Whitman Group's legal counsel. They were requesting that I sign a document acknowledging that I had never held an official role within the company and relinquishing any potential claims. I read it 3 times, my hands steady, my breathing calm. They weren't just excluding me anymore. They were trying to erase me. I forwarded the email to Elaine. Her response came 5 minutes later. "Do not sign anything. Call me." When I did, her voice was firm, focused. "They're nervous," she said, "which means something's wrong on their end." What kind of wrong? The kind that happens when someone realizes they've underestimated the wrong person. I sat there, phone pressed to my ear, heart beating slow and heavy. For the first time since this started, I didn't feel small. I felt clear. They thought this was about loyalty, about obedience. They had no idea that the moment they tried to write me out of the story, they'd given me a reason to step fully into it. And I was done being helpful. The next betrayal didn't arrive loudly. There was no shouting, no dramatic confrontation. It came disguised as paperwork and polite language, which somehow made it worse. Elaine asked me to come into her office on a Thursday morning. Her building was an old brick structure near the courthouse, the kind with narrow hallways and frosted glass doors. It smelled faintly of coffee and old books. She spread my documents across the conference table. Years of emails, spreadsheets with my metadata still embedded, drafts of financial statements that matched the company's final filings, line for line. "They used your work," she said simply. I know. No, she corrected gently. They used your work and represented it as someone else's. She pulled out one document in particular. A loan application submitted to a regional bank. Daniel's signature at the bottom. My projections attached as supporting evidence. They claimed internal accounting expertise, Elaine said. That expertise was you. My stomach tightened, but my face stayed calm. What does that mean? I asked. It means, she said, choosing her words carefully, that they've benefited financially from your labor while deliberately denying your involvement. That's a problem. I nodded. I wasn't surprised. Hurt, yes. Shocked, no. What do you want to do? She asked. The old version of me would have hesitated, would have asked what she thought was reasonable, would have worried about optics, about family fallout, about being seen as difficult. This version of me didn't. I want out, I said, cleanly, and I want them to stop pretending I was never there. Elaine leaned back. Then we proceed carefully. Carefully turned out to mean something very specific. Not confrontation. Documentation. Not emotion. Timing. We sent a single letter to the Whitman Group's attorney. Professional, neutral, fact-based. It outlined my contributions, the duration of my work, and the existence of corroborating evidence. It requested acknowledgement, not compensation. Recognition. That was it. No threats. No ultimatums. The response came 3 days later. They denied everything. Their letter stated that I had occasionally assisted as a family favor, that my involvement was informal, voluntary, and non-essential, that there was no expectation of ownership or acknowledgement. I read it twice, then handed it back to Elaine. They're lying, I said. Yes, she replied. And now they've put it in writing. Something shifted in her tone. Not excitement. Not satisfaction. Readiness. The fallout was immediate. My mother showed up at my condo unannounced that evening. She stood in the doorway like a woman bracing for bad weather, clutching her purse to her chest. This has gone too far, she said before I could invite her in. I stepped aside anyway. She walked past me, eyes scanning the room like she was cataloging what I might lose. They say you're threatening the business, she continued. Daniel's barely sleeping. Your father's blood pressure is through the roof. I closed the door behind her. I didn't threaten anything, I said. I asked for acknowledgement. She turned sharply. You hired a lawyer. So did they. That's different. I waited. She softened her voice, the way she always did when she wanted something. Why can't you just let this go, Claire? You've always been the strong one. There it was again. Strong. Independent. The qualities that justified my exclusion. I let it go for 7 years, I said. I'm done. Her eyes filled, but I didn't move to comfort her. I was tired of managing her emotions. If this ends badly, she said quietly, I don't know how we come back from it. I met her gaze. We already didn't. She left without another word. 2 days later, I was removed from the family group chat. Megan blocked me on social media. Daniel sent a single text. You didn't have to do this. I didn't reply. Then, the real damage surfaced. Elaine called me early one morning. Too early for good news. They're in trouble, she said, and they're trying to shift it. She explained that the potential buyer had uncovered discrepancies. Missing documentation, inconsistent financial reporting, projections that didn't align with current cash flow. The buyer had paused negotiations, and suddenly, my phone started ringing. Daniel. My father. Even Megan, calling from an unknown number. I didn't answer. Instead, I went to work. I sat through meetings. I reviewed reports. I lived my life. That evening, Elaine forwarded me an email thread. The Whitman Group was scrambling to recreate financial records I had maintained. Without my institutional memory, they were guessing. Incorrectly. They're asking the bank for extensions, Elaine said. They can't produce what they promised. I felt something then. Not joy, not revenge, relief. Because the story they'd told themselves for years, that I was replaceable, optional, expendable, was finally colliding with reality. The next escalation came from an unexpected direction. My grandmother's name appeared in an email. My father had contacted her old estate attorney, requesting copies of documents related to prior wills. Elaine flagged it immediately. He's looking for leverage, she said, or precedent. That was when I realized this wasn't just about the business. It was about control. They were afraid of what I might claim, what I might know, what I might still have access to. And for the first time, they couldn't make me go quiet by withholding affection or approval. They had already used that weapon. It no longer worked. A week later, Elaine called me into her office again. "I need to ask you something," she said. "And I need you to be honest." "Always," I replied. "Do you want to force this into court?" I thought about it. The cost, the time, the public record. "No," I said. "I want to end it." She nodded. "Then we make an offer." The offer was simple. A settlement agreement acknowledging my contributions, a modest financial compensation for past work, and a mutual non-disparagement clause. It wasn't about the money. It was about the paper trail. About existing. We sent it. 3 days passed. Then 4. On the 5th day, Daniel showed up at my door. He looked smaller than I remembered. His suit was wrinkled. His eyes were red. "We're running out of time," he said without greeting. I didn't invite him in. "You're going to ruin everything," he continued. "This deal falls apart, the company collapses." I studied him. The man who'd always stood in front of me, blocking the light, assuming I'd stay behind him. "You already ruined it," I said. "You just didn't think it would matter." He swallowed. "What do you want?" I didn't answer immediately. I wanted him to sit with the question. "I want you to sign," I said finally. "And I want you to stop pretending I was never here." He looked at me for a long moment. Then he nodded. "I'll talk to Dad." As he walked away, I felt it. The control shifting. Not because I demanded it, but because I stopped surrendering it. The call from Elaine came the next morning, just after 8. "They're asking for time," she said. I was standing in my kitchen, staring at the sink. The same one I'd washed dishes in while taking late-night calls from Daniel for years. I set my mug down carefully. "How much time?" "A week. Maybe 2. I didn't answer right away. Time was the currency my family had always used to control me. Wait. Be patient. Don't rush. Let things settle. Every delay had worked in their favor because it kept me hopeful and compliant. "What do you think?" Elaine asked. "I think they're stalling," I said. "And I think if I give them time, they'll use it to find another way around me." She was quiet for a moment. "I agree. Then we don't give them time." We sent a short reply. The offer stood as written. 7 days. After that, it would be withdrawn. That was the first boundary I'd ever enforced without apologizing for it. The reaction was immediate and messy. My father called that afternoon. Not to negotiate, to lecture. "You're backing us into a corner," he said. "I gave you an option," I replied. "You're being unreasonable." I leaned against the counter, phone pressed to my ear, listening to the familiar rhythm of his disapproval. For the first time, it didn't make my chest tighten. "I'm being clear," I said. "There's a difference." He scoffed. "You think a piece of paper is worth tearing this family apart?" I closed my eyes. "No," I said. "I think pretending I don't exist already did that." Silence. Then his voice dropped, colder. "If you go through with this, don't expect things to go back to the way they were." I almost smiled. "They already won't," I said. He hung up on me. 2 days later, Megan emailed me. Not to talk about the settlement, not to ask how I was, to inform me that my parents were updating their holiday plans, and that given the current tension, it might be best if I didn't attend Thanksgiving this year. I read the email once. Then again, Thanksgiving had always been the one holiday I thought was untouchable. The anchor. The proof that no matter what happened, we still gathered around the same table. Apparently, even that was conditional. I forwarded the email to Elaine without comment. Her reply came back a minute later. "This is retaliation. Save it." The words sat heavy in my chest. Retaliation. Not misunderstanding, not hurt feelings. Punishment. That night, I sat alone at my dining table and ate takeout noodles out of the container. I expected to feel lonely. Instead, I felt something closer to relief. No forced smiles, no careful conversation, no pretending, just quiet. On day 4 of the 7-day deadline, the buyer officially withdrew. Elaine found out before I did. "They lost the deal," she said. The bank followed. I closed my eyes. "What does that mean for them?" "It means," she said, "they're exposed. Cash flow issues, loans coming due, and no exit." My phone buzzed immediately afterward. Daniel. I let it ring. Then another call. My mother. Then a voicemail from my father. His voice tight and clipped. Call me. I didn't. Instead, I opened my laptop and reviewed the settlement one more time. It was clean, conservative, fair. More than fair. I thought about all the nights I'd worked until midnight, correcting mistakes no one ever knew about. All the Sundays I'd skip plans because Daniel just needed one more thing. All the praise he'd taken credit for, while I stayed invisible. This wasn't revenge. It was balance. On day 6, Elaine called me into her office. They want to amend the agreement, she said. In what way? They're offering more money. Still, no acknowledgement. I shook my head. No, she smiled faintly. I thought you'd say that. They don't get to buy my silence, I said. Not anymore. Elaine leaned forward. Then be prepared. This may get uglier. I know. And it did. That evening, my parents showed up at my condo together. I hadn't seen them arrive. I heard the knock and opened the door to find my mother clutching her coat and my father standing stiffly beside her. We need to talk, my mother said. I stepped aside without a word. They sat on my couch, looking around like guests in a stranger's home, which, I realized, they were. This is getting out of hand, my father said. You've made your point. I didn't make a point, I said. I made a request. My mother leaned forward. Claire, sweetheart, please. This is hurting everyone. I met her eyes. It's hurting you because it's not working. She flinched. We raised you better than this, my father snapped. I felt something settle inside me then. Something final. You raised me to be useful, I said, not to be respected. His face reddened. That's not true, isn't it? I asked. When did you ever introduce me as anything other than Daniel's sister? Silence. My mother started to cry. Why are you doing this? She whispered. I answered honestly, because I don't want to disappear. My father stood abruptly. If you go through with this, don't expect any inheritance. There it was. The last card. I looked at him. Calm. Then you should keep it, I said. I don't want anything that comes with strings. He stared at me like he didn't recognize me. Maybe he didn't. They left shortly after. No hugs. No resolution. The 7th day arrived quietly. Elaine called at noon. They signed. I closed my eyes. Exhaled slowly. They agreed to everything? I asked. Yes. Acknowledgement clause included. I felt a wave pass through me. Not triumph. Not joy. Release. They'll issue the payment within 30 days, she continued, and they're barred from contacting you about the business again. Good. After we hung up, I sat there for a long time. I thought I'd feel vindicated, or powerful, or angry. What I felt instead was empty, in a clean way, like a room after furniture has been moved out. Later that night, Daniel sent me one last message. I hope you're happy. I stared at it, then typed a reply I never sent. Instead, I deleted the thread. The next morning, I woke up without an alarm. It was a Saturday. No obligations, no expectations. For the first time in years, my life felt like it belonged to me. I didn't know yet what I was going to build in the space my family had vacated, but I knew this much. They had taken my silence for loyalty, and I had finally taken it back. The silence after the settlement was louder than any argument we'd ever had. No calls, no texts, no accidental run-ins engineered by my mother under the guise of just checking in. It was as if I'd been erased with the same efficiency they'd once tried to deny my existence on paper. I didn't block anyone. I didn't announce boundaries. I simply stopped reaching. That was new for me. For years, I'd been the connective tissue, the one who remembered birthdays, the one who smoothed over tension, the one who sent follow-up emails and thank you notes. When I stepped back, the absence showed immediately. Thanksgiving came and went without an invitation. I spent the day volunteering at a community food bank, stacking boxes, listening to strangers talk about their lives. No one there knew my last name. No one expected anything from me, except that I show up and do the work. It felt clean. 2 weeks after the settlement finalized, the money hit my account. I stared at the number for a long time. It wasn't life-changing. It wasn't revenge fantasy money. It was acknowledgement in numeric form. I transferred half of it into savings and used the rest to pay off my remaining student loans. The balance dropped to zero, and something in my chest loosened that I hadn't realized was still tight. Debt, like family obligation, had a way of shaping your choices quietly. With both gone, my life felt strangely open. The first crack in the family silence came from an unexpected place. My Aunt Helen, my father's younger sister, emailed me late one night. "I wasn't supposed to know," she wrote, "but I think you should." Attached was a forwarded message chain. Daniel had tried to restructure the business again, this time without the buyer. He'd overextended, refinanced properties, taken out short-term loans to cover operating expenses, and then the line that made my stomach drop. He'd used projections, my projections, the ones I'd built years earlier, the ones that assumed a market that no longer existed. Without context, without updates, without understanding. They were bleeding cash. I closed my laptop slowly. This wasn't my fault. I knew that. But knowing and feeling are different things. Elaine had warned me this might happen. "They relied on you more than they admitted," she'd said, "and they never learned how to replace you." I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt a dull ache, not for the business, but for the people trapped inside the story they refused to revise. A month later, my mother called. I almost didn't answer. Almost. "Hello?" I said. Her voice sounded smaller, tired. "Hi, Claire." We sat in silence for a moment, neither of us filling it. "Your father's been unwell," she said finally. "Stress." I waited. "He doesn't talk about the business much anymore." Still waiting. "I thought you should know." There it was. The expectation. Concern would pull me back in. Responsibility would wake up. "I'm sorry he's not feeling well," I said. "I hope he takes care of himself." She sighed. "Is that all you have to say?" "Yes." She didn't argue. She just hung up. That night, I lay awake thinking about how easily concern could become a trap. How many times I'd stepped back into harm because someone I loved was hurting. This time, I didn't move. 2 weeks later, I got an email from the Whitman Group's general counsel. Short. Formal. They were dissolving one of the LLCs. Assets would be sold to cover debts. My name was mentioned only once, in reference to the prior settlement. I forwarded it to Elaine. She confirmed it didn't affect me. "You're clear," she said. "Completely clear." I started sleeping better after that. Around the same time, something else began to take shape. A colleague at my firm, Jenna, asked me to grab coffee. We'd worked together for years, but never closely. "I heard you might be looking for a change," she said. "I didn't say that," I replied. She smiled. "You didn't have to." She told me about a small advisory group she was forming. Independent, client-focused, no family politics, no legacy baggage. They needed someone who understood financial systems deeply, someone steady, someone who could see consequences before they happened. I listened. For the first time in a long while, someone was describing my skills without attaching them to anyone else's name. "I'll think about it," I said. She nodded. "Take your time." I did. That winter, I took a weekend trip alone. Drove north, stayed in a quiet inn, walked along frozen trails. No one knew where I was. No one expected updates. I realized then how much of my identity had been shaped by reaction, by anticipating needs, by bracing for conflict. Without that constant vigilance, I felt lighter. In February, I accepted Jenna's offer. The new firm launched in March. 3 partners, modest office, clear contracts. For the first time, my work had boundaries. The success was gradual, but real. Clients came through referrals. The work was challenging, honest. And then, in early April, I received a message that made my hands shake. Daniel had been named personally in a lawsuit. A lender was alleging misrepresentation. Elaine confirmed it within the hour. They're claiming he knowingly submitted outdated financials. I closed my eyes. That could have serious consequences, she added. I thought about the loan application I'd seen months ago. My work attached. His signature. "They can't touch me," I said. It was a statement, not a question. "No," Elaine replied. "You're protected. Your documentation is airtight." I believed her. Still, that night, I sat at my kitchen table and felt the full weight of what had happened. I hadn't destroyed them. I had simply stepped out of the way and let the structure they'd built collapse under its own assumptions. The realization was sobering. A week later, Megan emailed me. It was the first direct contact in months. We need to talk. I stared at the screen. Part of me wanted to ignore it. Another part knew this was coming. I replied with a single line. About what? Her response came quickly. About what you did to our family. I closed my laptop. The story wasn't over yet, but I was no longer reacting. I was choosing when and if I would engage. I didn't respond to Megan right away, not because I didn't know what to say, but because I finally understood something I'd never allowed myself to before. Silence, when chosen deliberately, is not avoidance. It's control. 3 days passed, then 4. On the 5th day, she sent another message. I'm serious, Claire. This is bigger than you and me. That line would have worked on me once. Bigger than you, bigger than your feelings, bigger than your boundaries. It was the family's favorite way to reframe harm as duty. I typed my reply slowly. If you want to talk, say what you actually want to talk about. There was a long pause. Then, Daniel might lose everything. There it was. Not an apology. Not accountability. An emergency designed to pull me back into position. I set my phone down and went for a walk. It was early spring. The air still had a bite to it, but the trees were starting to bud. I walked without headphones, listening to the rhythm of my own steps, letting my thoughts settle. Daniel might lose everything. The truth was, he already had. He'd just been too insulated to notice. That night, I called Elaine. They're circling, I said. Yes, she replied calmly. That's what happens when consequences arrive. What happens if I meet with Megan? Elaine didn't tell me what to do. She never did. She asked a better question. What do you want from the meeting? I thought about it. I don't want to be pulled back in, I said. And I don't want to be used as a solution. Then set terms, she said, before you agree to anything. So I did. I messaged Megan back. We can meet. 1 hour, public place. No discussion of legal matters or the business. If that's not acceptable, then no. Her reply came almost immediately. Fine. We met at a cafe halfway between our neighborhoods. Neutral territory. No childhood memories attached to the walls. Megan arrived late, as usual. She looked tired, thinner. Her confidence, once effortless, felt forced. She didn't hug me. Thanks for coming, she said, sitting down. I nodded. You said this was important. She exhaled sharply. You don't understand how bad things are. I understand more than you think, I replied. She frowned. Then how can you just walk away? I studied her face. The familiar features. The same eyes that used to roll when I was praised for being responsible. I didn't walk away, I said. I was pushed out. She waved a hand. That's not fair. Neither was erasing my work, I said evenly, or rewriting the will, or uninviting me from Thanksgiving. Her jaw tightened. You're holding grudges. No, I said. I'm remembering facts. She leaned forward. Dad's not well. Daniel's under investigation. The business might collapse. I waited. Aren't you going to help? She asked. There it was. The ask without asking. No, I said. She stared at me. You can't just say no. I can, I replied. And I am. Her voice rose. You're being selfish. I felt the word land, familiar and dull. I'm being consistent, I said, with the boundaries you all set. She shook her head. This isn't about boundaries. This is about family. I took a sip of my coffee. Family didn't protect me. She opened her mouth, then closed it. For a moment, I thought she might actually listen. Then she said, You're enjoying this, aren't you? I met her eyes. No, I'm surviving it. That stopped her. She leaned back, crossed her arms. So that's it? You're just done with us? I thought about the years I'd spent trying to earn space, trying to prove my value. I'm done being managed, I said. I'm not done being human. She looked away. Daniel says you're the reason this is happening. I nodded. That's easier than admitting his choices matter. The hour ended without resolution. We stood up awkwardly. No hug, no promise to stay in touch. As she walked away, she said quietly, You used to be different. I watched her go. I was different. And that was the point. 2 weeks later, the lawsuit became public. A local business journal ran a short piece. No names in the headline. Just, Regional firm faces legal scrutiny over financial disclosures. Elaine called me immediately. You might get contacted, she said. Press maybe. Do not engage. I won't. I know, she replied. That same afternoon, my father called. I stared at the phone as it rang. This time, I answered. Claire, he said, his voice strained. Yes, we need to talk. I'm listening. There was a long pause. I could hear his breathing. I made mistakes, he said finally. The words were careful, measured. Which ones? I asked. Another pause. I trusted the wrong people. I closed my eyes. I don't think that's the mistake you need to name, I said. His voice hardened. I'm not here to debate the past. Then we have nothing to talk about, I replied. He sighed. Daniel's lawyer thinks you could help. There it was, stripped of pretense. I won't, I said. You're really going to let this destroy us? He asked. I answered quietly. You already did. He hung up. That night, I sat alone in my apartment and let myself feel it. Not anger, not guilt, grief for the family I thought I had, for the version of myself who kept trying. But grief, I was learning, doesn't mean reversal. It means acceptance. In early May, the advisory firm landed its first major client, a mid-sized nonprofit restructuring after years of mismanagement. I led the engagement. For weeks, I worked late, not out of obligation, but purpose. I helped untangle systems that had grown toxic. I set up processes that made exploitation harder. One night, Jenna looked at me across the conference table and said, "You're good at this. Not just the numbers, the boundaries." I smiled. I had a lot of practice learning the hard way. By the end of the month, Daniel's name was formally listed in court filings. The Whitman Group announced layoffs. My mother sent me a single text. I don't recognize this family anymore. I read it once, then set my phone down. Neither did I. But for the first time in my life, that realization didn't scare me. It steadied me, because I was no longer trying to belong to something that required my silence. And that meant whatever came next, I would meet it, standing on my own ground. The first subpoena arrived on a Wednesday. Elaine forwarded it to me with a single line. This was always possible. I read the document carefully. My name appeared twice, once as a former informal contributor, once as a potential witness. Not a defendant, not a target, a witness. I felt oddly calm. For years, I'd lived with the low-grade anxiety of being blamed for things I hadn't done. This was different. This was structured, defined, contained by rules. I called Elaine. We respond, she said. We cooperate. We stick to facts. I don't want to hurt anyone, I said. You're not, she replied. You're telling the truth. That distinction mattered. 2 days later, my mother showed up again. This time, she looked defeated. She stood in my doorway, shoulders slumped, eyes rimmed red. I just want to understand, she said. I hesitated, then stepped aside. She sat at my kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug I didn't remember offering her. I don't recognize Daniel, she said quietly. I don't recognize your father. I waited. And I don't recognize you, she added. I met her gaze. That's because you never really looked before. She flinched, but didn't deny it. I thought keeping the peace was love, she said. I thought if everyone stayed in their roles, we'd be okay. I nodded. So did I. For a long time, tears slipped down her cheeks. I didn't know how much you were doing. I know, I said. That was the problem. She reached across the table, hesitated, then pulled her hand back. I don't know how to fix this, she whispered. I answered honestly. You don't. You just stop making it worse. She left quietly. A week later, I sat in a conference room downtown with 2 attorneys and a court reporter. They asked me about spreadsheets, about emails, about who prepared what and when. I answered calmly. Precisely. No editorializing, no emotion, just facts. When it was over, one of the attorneys nodded slightly at me. Thank you for your cooperation, he said. As I left the building, the weight of the past few months settled differently in my body. I wasn't defending myself anymore. I was simply standing where I'd always been. Finally visible. The backlash came fast. A mutual acquaintance called to warn me that my name was being discussed, that some people thought I was cold, disloyal, opportunistic. I listened, thanked them, and went back to my day. Those words used to terrify me. Now, they felt like echoes. Daniel's case dragged on through the summer. Details leaked. Nothing explosive, just enough to confirm what I already knew. He'd believed he could outrun consequences, the way he'd always outrun accountability. Meanwhile, my life kept expanding. The advisory firm grew. We hired another analyst, took on more clients. I moved into a new apartment, smaller but brighter. Windows that faced east, morning light that made me feel awake instead of braced. One evening as I was unpacking, I found an old family photo tucked into a box of papers. Christmas, years ago. Daniel, front and center. Megan, smiling. My parents, beaming. And me, half out of frame, holding a serving dish. I stared at it for a long time. Then I put it in a drawer. Not everything needs to be on display. In August, Megan called again. This time, she sounded different. Quieter. Daniel's been indicted, she said. I closed my eyes. I'm sorry, I said, and I meant it. He keeps saying this wouldn't have happened if you just helped, she continued. I felt something then. Not anger. Sadness. That's not true, I said, and you know it. She didn't argue. After a moment, she said, I don't know how to talk to him anymore. I thought about my answer. You don't have to, I said. Silence stretched between us. Do you think we'll ever be okay? She asked. I considered the question carefully. I think we'll be different, I said. And that might be the closest thing. She didn't respond. But she didn't hang up either. That fall, the court scheduled a trial date. I was listed as a witness for the prosecution. Elaine prepared me thoroughly. We reviewed documents, practiced answering questions without elaboration. Your job, she said, is to tell the truth and let the rest land where it may. I nodded. On the day of my testimony, I wore a navy blazer and flat shoes. Nothing dramatic, nothing soft. Daniel sat at the defense table, shoulders hunched, eyes fixed on the floor. He didn't look at me. When I took the stand, I felt steady. I answered questions, clarified timelines, confirmed authorship. At one point, the defense attorney asked, Did you ever object to how your work was used? I paused. Yes, I said. When I was excluded, I withdrew my support. The room was silent. Afterward, I left without looking back. That night, I sat on my balcony, watching the city lights flicker on one by one. I thought about how long I'd lived trying to be agreeable, trying to be invisible. The irony was sharp. The moment I stopped performing, everything changed. Not because I became ruthless, but because I became real. The verdict didn't come with a bang. No dramatic gasps, no shouting in the courtroom. Just a quiet reading of facts, followed by a decision that felt almost anticlimactic after everything that had led up to it. Daniel was found liable on multiple counts: misrepresentation, breach of fiduciary duty, financial misconduct. He wasn't going to prison, but the penalties were severe. Heavy fines, a permanent mark on his professional record, disqualification from holding executive roles in similar businesses for years. As I sat in the back row, listening, I felt nothing I'd imagined I would. No triumph, no vindication, just a deep, heavy stillness. When it was over, Elaine leaned toward me. You did well. I nodded. I just told the truth. That's usually enough, she said. Outside the courthouse, reporters clustered near the steps. Cameras flashing, microphones extended. I walked past them without stopping. Someone called my name. I didn't turn around. For the first time, I understood something clearly. Closure doesn't come from being seen. It comes from no longer needing to be. The aftermath hit my family in uneven waves. My father didn't call. My mother sent a card. No message inside, just her signature. Megan, I don't know who we are without the business. I stared at the message for a long time. Then I typed, You'll figure it out. Or you won't. Either way, it's not mine to fix. I set the phone down. That winter was quiet. The advisory firm continued to grow, slowly but steadily. We brought on another partner, someone older, with decades of experience and no interest in power games. Our clients trusted us, not because we promised miracles, but because we were honest about limits. I started teaching a night course at a local community college. Financial literacy, practical stuff, budgeting, contracts, red flags. On the first night, a woman in her late 50s stayed behind after class. I wish someone had taught me this before I trusted my brother, she said. I nodded. Me too. The work felt meaningful, in a way my old life never had. In January, my father suffered a minor stroke. I found out from Megan. He recovered physically, But something else shifted. His voice on the phone, when he finally called me weeks later, sounded thinner. "I don't know what to do now," he said. I closed my eyes. "I can't tell you that," I replied. He was quiet for a long time. "You always knew what to do," he said. I thought about the girl I used to be. The one who anticipated needs before they were spoken. The one who carried weight that wasn't hers. "I knew how to adapt," I said. "That's different." He didn't argue. We didn't reconcile. We didn't have a breakthrough conversation, but something loosened. In March, I attended a small conference in Chicago. Women in Finance. No family names, no history. I gave a talk about governance, about the danger of informal power structures, about what happens when accountability is replaced by loyalty. Afterward, a woman approached me. "You sound like someone who learned the hard way," she said. I smiled. "Most people do." She handed me her card. "A board member at a regional nonprofit. We could use someone like you," she said. I didn't say yes right away, but I didn't say no. That spring, I planted a small herb garden on my balcony. Basil, rosemary, thyme. Every morning, I watered it slowly, deliberately. No rushing, no multitasking. It felt symbolic in a way I didn't fully articulate. In May, Megan showed up at my door. She looked nervous, unsure. "I'm not here to ask you to fix anything," she said quickly. I don't know who else to talk to." I considered her, the sister who had benefited from my silence without ever noticing. "Come in," I said. We sat at my kitchen table, the same one my mother had cried at months earlier. "I'm thinking of leaving," Megan said. "Starting over, somewhere else." "That sounds reasonable," I replied. She looked surprised. "You don't think it's running away?" "No," I said. "I think it's choosing." She exhaled, relief washing over her face. "Do you hate us?" she asked quietly. I thought about it. "No," I said, "but I don't organize my life around you anymore." She nodded slowly, like she was absorbing a new language. When she left, she hugged me. Brief, awkward, real. That night, I sat alone and reflected on how far I'd come, not from them, from myself. I'd learned that fairness doesn't come from pleading, that boundaries don't need permission, that silence can be a weapon, but it can also be a sanctuary. Most of all, I'd learned that reclaiming your life doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like a quiet morning, a steady job, a balcony garden. Sometimes it looks like saying no and meaning it. And sometimes it looks like letting people face the consequences of a world they built without you. The invitation arrived in early June, tucked between a utility bill and a flyer for a local yoga studio. Cream-colored envelope. My name typed, not handwritten. No return address. I knew who it was from before I opened it. Inside was a single card. "Family meeting. Sunday, 3 p.m. Your parents' house." No explanation, no apology. Just an assumption of access that felt almost nostalgic in its audacity. I placed the card on the counter and stared at it for a long time. This was how it always started. A summons, disguised as concern. A belief that no matter what had happened, I would show up when called. I didn't decide immediately. Instead, I went about my week. I met with clients, taught my class, watered my herbs, lived the life I'd built carefully, deliberately, without asking anyone's permission. By Saturday night, the card was still sitting where I'd left it. Elaine noticed it when she stopped by for dinner. "You're thinking about going," she said. "Yes. Do you want to?" I considered the question. "I don't know," I said honestly, "but I think they expect me to." She nodded. "Then go for yourself, not for them." That distinction mattered. Sunday afternoon, I drove to my parents' house for the first time in almost a year. The neighborhood looked the same. Trim lawns, quiet streets. Familiar in a way that used to feel like safety. Now it just felt contained. My father answered the door. He looked older than I remembered. Not frail, just diminished. Like someone who'd lost the certainty that once filled his posture. "Claire," he said. "Dad." He stepped aside. I walked in. My mother was already seated in the living room. Megan sat beside her. Daniel wasn't there. I noticed his absence immediately. "We wanted to talk," my mother said. I remained standing. "About what?" I asked. She glanced at my father, then back at me. "About moving forward." I nodded once. "Go on." My father cleared his throat. "The business is being dissolved." I waited. "There will be proceeds," he continued. "Not much, but something." Still waiting. We thought, my mother said carefully, it would be right to include you. There it was. Not acknowledgement, not accountability. Inclusion. On their terms, after the damage was done. I don't understand, I said. My father gestured vaguely. A share, equal, for the three of you. I studied their faces. This wasn't generosity. It was damage control. And why now? I asked. Silence. Megan shifted uncomfortably, because everything fell apart. I nodded. Yes, it did. My mother reached for my hand. I stepped back before she could touch me. I need to be clear, I said. If this is about easing guilt or restoring appearances, I'm not interested. My father frowned. This is about fairness. No, I replied. Fairness would have been involving me before things collapsed. His jaw tightened. You always do this, he said. You make everything harder than it needs to be. I felt the old reflex stir. The urge to explain, to justify. I let it pass. I'm not making anything harder, I said. I'm just not making it easier for you anymore. My mother's eyes filled. We're trying. I know, I said. And it's too late. Megan looked up at me. So that's it? You're just walking away? I shook my head. I walked away a long time ago. This is just you noticing. My father stood. You're being unreasonable. I met his gaze steadily. I'm being consistent. The room went quiet. Finally, my mother whispered, What do you want, Claire? The question landed differently this time. I didn't answer immediately. I wanted to be precise. I want distance, I said. I want no financial ties, no shared decisions, no expectations. My father scoffed. So you don't want your share? No, I said. I don't. Megan stared at me. You're serious? Yes. My mother covered her mouth. Why? I answered simply. Because every gift from this family has always come with a cost. My father looked at me like I'd betrayed him all over again. You think you're better than us now? He asked. I shook my head. No. I just don't need you. The words hung in the air, heavier than anything I'd said before. That was the moment. The moment I saw it in his eyes. Not anger. Fear. Fear that control had finally slipped somewhere he couldn't reach. I turned toward the door. Claire, my mother said softly. I paused. I hope you find peace, she said. I looked back at her. Really looked. I hope you stop confusing peace with silence, I replied. Then I left. I sat in my car for a few minutes before driving away. My hands were steady, my breathing slow. I wasn't shaking. That surprised me. On the drive home, I realized something quietly profound. They had finally offered me what I'd spent years thinking I wanted. Inclusion, equality, a seat at the table. And I had declined it without regret. Because somewhere along the way, I'd built my own table. That evening, I got a message from Daniel. I heard you were there. I didn't reply. 10 minutes later, another message appeared. I never meant for things to go this far. I stared at the screen. Then I typed. Intent doesn't erase impact. I sent it, then muted the thread. Later that night, I sat on my balcony as the sun dipped below the buildings. The city hummed. Life moved. I thought about how power works, how it thrives on access, on the belief that someone can always pull you back in. They couldn't anymore. And that, more than any verdict or settlement or apology that never came, was the real shift. Because when you stop needing permission to leave, no one can trap you in the room again. The weeks after that meeting felt strangely suspended, like the pause after a storm when the air hasn't decided what it's going to do next. No more invitations arrived, no calls, no updates. For the first time, my family didn't pursue me when I stepped away. I didn't know whether that was respect or exhaustion. Either way, I accepted it. Work filled the space easily. The advisory firm signed 2 new clients in July, both family-owned businesses struggling with succession planning. The irony wasn't lost on me. In our first meeting, one of the owners said, "We don't want to tear the family apart." I looked at him calmly and said, "Then you need rules before you need trust." He blinked, surprised, then nodded slowly. That became a theme. Boundaries, documentation, clear roles. I wasn't just good at the work. I understood the cost of avoiding it. One afternoon, as I was leaving the office, Jenna stopped me in the hallway. "You ever think about how different your life is now?" she asked. "All the time," I said. She smiled. "You seem lighter." I considered that. I am. But it's not because things are easy. It's because they're honest. That summer, I took my first real vacation in years. Not a long weekend, not a trip squeezed between deadlines. 10 days. Alone. I went to the Pacific Northwest. Stayed in a small coastal town where no one knew me. I walked the beach every morning, shoes in my hand, the cold water numbing my ankles. On the third day, sitting on a driftwood log watching the fog roll in, I realized something uncomfortable. I wasn't angry anymore. For years, anger had fueled me. Even when I pretended it wasn't there, it had kept me alert, motivated, sharp. Without it, I had to learn how to move differently. That night, I wrote in a notebook I'd brought with me. Anger was never my power. Clarity is. When I got back, a letter was waiting for me, handwritten. Familiar handwriting. My mother. I didn't open it immediately. I let it sit on the counter for a full day before I picked it up. Inside was a single page. She wrote about the house feeling empty, about how quiet dinners had become, about missing the way things used to be. She didn't apologize, but she didn't accuse me either. At the end, she wrote, "I don't know how to be your mother without telling you what to do." I folded the letter carefully and put it in a drawer. That sentence explained more than she probably intended. I didn't reply. In August, the nonprofit board I'd met in Chicago formally invited me to join. I accepted. The work was challenging, meaningful, and importantly, it didn't involve fixing anyone who refused to change. At the first board meeting, someone asked about my background. I grew up around a family business, I said, and learned what happens when power goes unchecked. They nodded, satisfied. No one asked for more. That fall, Daniel was sentenced. Probation, restitution, professional restrictions. Megan called me afterward. "He's not doing well," she said. "I'm sorry," I replied. There was a long pause. "He keeps saying he wants to talk to you." I inhaled slowly. "That doesn't mean I should." "I know," she said, her voice cracked. "I just thought you should know." I thanked her and hung up. For the first time, I didn't feel pulled. I felt sad, yes, but not responsible. That distinction mattered more than anything. In October, the Whitman house went on the market. A realtor's listing popped up in my feed. 4 bedrooms, recently renovated, motivated seller. I stared at the photos longer than I expected. That house had been the center of gravity for my entire childhood. The place where decisions were made, alliances formed, silence enforced. Now it was just another property. I closed the listing and went on with my day. One evening, as I was cooking dinner, my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. I almost ignored it. "Claire?" a male voice said when I answered. "Yes, this is Mark Levinson. I represent your brother." I closed my eyes briefly. "What does Daniel want?" I asked. "He's exploring options for restitution," Mark said. "He believes you might be open to discussing terms privately." "I'm not," I said. "He feels remorse," Mark continued. "I'm sure he does," I replied. "But remorse doesn't entitle him to access." There was a pause. "I'll relay that," he said. When the call ended, I felt a quiet certainty settle in. This was no longer about refusing. It was about choosing. Choosing who had access to my time, my energy, my emotional labor. Choosing not to reopen doors that had taken years to close. That night, I sat on my balcony again, the city air cool against my skin. I thought about how much I'd once believed resolution meant reconciliation. I was learning something different. Resolution can mean acceptance without reunion, peace without proximity, closure without apology, and most importantly, a life that no longer revolves around people who only value you when they can control you. As the lights flickered on across the city, I felt it clearly. The story wasn't ending, but it was no longer theirs to tell. By November, the quiet had settled into something steady. Not numbness, not avoidance. Stability. The kind that comes when you're no longer waiting for the other shoe to drop. Work moved forward with a rhythm I trusted. The nonprofit board approved a new financial transparency policy I'd helped design. The night class wrapped its semester, and on the last evening, a woman in her early 60s hugged me and said, "You gave me language for things I always felt but couldn't explain." I carried that with me longer than she probably realized. Thanksgiving approached without ceremony. No invitations, no guilt-laced messages. I hosted a small dinner instead. 3 friends, simple food, no traditions we felt obligated to perform. At one point, Jenna raised her glass and said, "To chosen family." We clinked glasses. I smiled. That word used to sound like consolation, like something you settled for. Now it sounded accurate. The only unexpected interruption came a week later, on a gray Tuesday afternoon. Elaine called. "I wanted you to hear this from me," she said. "Daniel's filing a civil claim." I stopped walking. "For what?" I asked. "Emotional distress," she replied, then added quickly, "It won't go anywhere." I exhaled slowly. "He's still blaming me." "Yes," she said, "but this is about optics, not outcome." I sat down on a bench outside my office building. "What do I need to do?" I asked. "Nothing," she said. "We respond. We dismiss. You continue living your life." The old me would have spiraled, would have tried to anticipate every angle. This version of me felt detached. "I trust you," I said. "And I trust the facts," she replied. The claim was dismissed within weeks. No hearing, no spectacle, just paperwork. When Megan told me, her voice sounded tired. "He doesn't know how to stop fighting," she said. I thought about that. "Some people confuse conflict with connection," I said. "It's the only way they know how to stay relevant." She didn't disagree. December arrived quietly. The Whitman house sold. My parents moved into a smaller place outside the city. Megan relocated to another state. Daniel stayed behind, living somewhere I didn't ask about. The center finally gave way. One evening, my mother called, not to ask for anything, not to update me, just to talk. We spoke about neutral things, weather, a book she was reading, the way the neighborhood had changed. At one point she said, "I don't expect things to go back." "I know," I replied. "I wish I'd done better," she said softly. I believed her, in her way. "I wish you had too," I said. Not cruel, just true. We ended the call, without promises. And that was enough. On the last weekend before Christmas, I attended a small gathering hosted by the nonprofit. Donors, volunteers, staff. A woman I didn't know well asked what had drawn me to this kind of work. I considered my answer. "I come from a family where silence was currency," I said. "I'm interested in building systems that don't rely on silence to function." She nodded thoughtfully. "That makes sense." Later that night, I walked home alone through cold streets lit with holiday lights. I passed families carrying shopping bags, couples arguing quietly, people rushing towards something they hoped would feel like belonging. For the first time, I didn't feel outside of it. I felt adjacent, observant, free. The final message of the year came on December 30th from my father. Short. Uncharacteristic. "I think about you more than you know." I read it once. Then I set the phone down and didn't respond. Not because I was punishing him, but because some realizations don't require replies. That night, I sat by the window with a cup of tea and thought about the arc of the past year. How it began with exclusion, disguised as restructuring. How it escalated through betrayal, manipulation, and silence. How the turning point wasn't a fight or a confrontation, but a decision to stop explaining, to stop accommodating, to stop performing for approval that was never coming. I hadn't won anything. I had reclaimed something. Agency. The ability to choose myself without apology. As the year closed, I understood something I wished I'd known earlier. You don't need the people who hurt you to understand your boundaries. You just need to enforce them. And once you do, the noise fades. What remains is a life that finally feels like your own. The new year didn't arrive with fireworks in my life. It came quietly, like everything that actually lasts. January 1st, I woke up without an alarm. Light filtered through the curtains of my apartment, soft and unhurried. I lay there for a while, listening to the city wake up, and realized something simple but profound. No one needed anything from me that morning. No crisis. No guilt, no unspoken expectation that I would step in and fix what someone else had broken. I made coffee, watered the herbs on my balcony, and sat down with a notebook I'd been keeping since the trip to the coast. I didn't write goals or resolutions. I wrote a list. Things I will no longer do. I will no longer explain my decisions to people who benefit from misunderstanding me. I will no longer accept proximity as proof of love. I will no longer confuse endurance with virtue. I will no longer mistake control for care. It wasn't dramatic. It was grounding. Work resumed its steady pace. The advisory firm entered its second year with more confidence than ambition. We weren't trying to scale fast or impress anyone. We focused on doing the work well, documenting everything, and refusing clients who wanted shortcuts. One afternoon, a prospective client said, half joking, "You're very firm about boundaries for someone in finance." I smiled politely. That's where they matter most. At the nonprofit, we launched a pilot program aimed at financial education for women re-entering the workforce after long gaps. Divorce, caregiving, family businesses that never paid them but always depended on them. During one session, a woman raised her hand and said, "I always thought I was bad with money, but now I'm realizing I was just never allowed to touch it." The room went quiet. I understood that silence intimately. In February, I ran into Daniel unexpectedly. It was at a grocery store, of all places. I was reaching for a carton of eggs when I noticed him a few feet away, staring at the shelves like he couldn't decide on anything. He looked thinner, older. Our eyes met. For a moment, neither of us spoke. "Claire," he said, finally. "Daniel." He shifted his weight. "I heard you doing well." "I'm doing okay," I replied. He nodded, as if bracing himself. I wanted to say, "I don't know how to say this without it sounding wrong." I waited. "I thought being in charge meant being important," he said. "I didn't realize how much you were holding together." I steadied him. This wasn't an apology, but it wasn't nothing either. "I hope you figure out what matters to you," I said. He swallowed. "I'm trying." We stood there, two adults in a fluorescent-lit aisle, the past humming quietly between us. "I should go," he said. "So should I." We parted without drama. No hug, no promise. And that was exactly right. Later that day, I realized something surprising. Seeing him hadn't reopened any wounds. It confirmed they had healed. Spring arrived early that year. I took longer walks, signed up for a pottery class on a whim. My hands, so used to keyboards and paperwork, learned something slower, imperfect. One evening, as I carried a lopsided bowl home, I laughed out loud at how uneven it was. It was mine. In April, Megan sent me a photo. She was standing in front of a small house in another state, keys in her hand, smiling in a way I hadn't seen since we were teenagers. I typed back, "I'm glad you chose yourself." She replied, "I learned that from you." I sat with that for a long time. Not pride. Recognition. By summer, the story had stopped circulating. No one asked about the lawsuit anymore, or the business, or the family fallout. I was no longer that one who sued her family, or the sister who caused problems. I was just Claire, a professional, a board member, a woman with a full life. One evening, sitting on my balcony as the sun dipped low, I thought back to the version of myself from 2 years earlier, standing in my mother's kitchen, holding cold coffee, listening to my future being discussed like a logistics problem. I wanted to reach across time and tell her something. You are not being included because inclusion was never the point. Control was. But she had to learn it herself. The truth is, the hardest part wasn't being excluded. It was realizing how much of my life I'd spent trying to earn a seat at a table that only existed to keep me in my place. Walking away didn't make me powerful. It made me free. If there's one thing I've learned through all of this, it's this. You don't need closure conversations. You don't need apologies that may never come. You don't need people to admit they were wrong. You need boundaries that don't move when tested. You need the courage to tolerate being misunderstood. You need to choose your dignity over belonging. Because love that requires you to disappear is not love. And family that only values you when you comply is not family. Sometimes the most decisive act isn't confrontation. It's signing the paper. It's not replying to the message. It's leaving the room quietly and building a life that doesn't need their permission. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever been the one who carried the weight, kept the peace, paid the unseen cost, I want you to know this. You're not cold for walking away. You're not selfish for choosing yourself. You're not cruel for refusing to be controlled. You're awake, and once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. If you're still here, thank you for listening. If this story felt familiar, you're not alone. And if you want to hear more stories like this, the kind that don't glorify revenge, but honor clarity, boundaries, and quiet payback, You know what to do. Take care of yourself first. Everything else can wait.